We talk with Lauren Zelt about lawsuit abuse on this week's podcast.
Bald,
blind,
and buddies.
Timmy, how are you, you blind bastard? What's new, pal? Happy Friday.
I'm good. You got a new hat for that bald skull of yours?
You know this, that I actually cannot wear hats.
Oh, because they have to extra size. Can't you get them like custom? I mean, they're big.
I could ultimately get one custom made, but I forget what the exact measurement was. But when I played football, they had to specially order a helmet for.
Well, there should be like big, tall, and giant cranium or something.
Like a store that has
a store, big, tall, and big head.
Oblong.
Yeah, I mean, like lids. Like they have the lids in them all. None of those. Like they don't have like the section in back or.
Well, that's how I got the nickname Doogie, right?
Yeah.
Jimmy saw me because he's like, "You look like Doogie Howser with your head so big."
Yeah.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I'm fine with that. I can deal with it. But I am excited to talk about our next guest. But before we do that, did you happen to see the Supreme Court ruling that came down today?
I did. And we'll have to see if our guest has thoughts on it.
I was going to, that'll be a nice dovetail, obviously. But Timmy, why don't you take the opportunity to introduce our next guest that we're honored to host?
Sure. So we are welcoming Lauren Zelt. She obtained a degree at Georgetown, a good Jesuit school, and then went on to do things in media. I saw a master diver, which I want to learn about too, but is now at a group called Protecting American Consumers Together and dealing with things like lawsuit abuse and ways to help the American consumer. So, Lauren, welcome to the podcast.
Lauren, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
I wouldn't go that far. We're not that impressive. I'm not that impressed.
Well, I'm glad to be here on an afternoon that's enjoyable. How's that?
Yeah.
There you go.
Oh, totally.
Beats working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a goal to make the law more affordable, accessible, and transparent for everyday Americans. What does that mean?
Sure. So Protecting American Consumers Together, we're a national advocacy group dedicated to standing up for plaintiffs, victims, and consumers to ensure that they can access a fair and transparent legal process. Obviously our legal process is not generally slow, or is not generally quick.
I was going to say, that's a
Freudian
you're
like,
slip
wait,
right there.
you're like, wait, what? Yeah. Sorry. It's a slow process, and there's a lot of abuse within the system. So Protecting American Consumers Together, we call it PACT because that is a mouthful. We want to make sure that people are able to access the legal system in a way that ensures them the justice that they deserve. But we also want to make sure that the legal system isn't run rampant with abuse, which unfortunately in certain states across the country and really everywhere is running rampant right now. And American consumers are paying for this, which is something that I don't think people really are that much aware of. But because of lawsuit abuse, the average American family pays about $4,200 extra a year. And that's in increased costs of goods and services. So everything from, the groceries on the store shelves, your car insurance. When you visit your favorite restaurant, maybe they've been affected by lawsuit abuse, so they have to raise their prices. When you call a rideshare service, they have to carry certain amounts of insurance, and a lot of that is more expensive because of lawsuit abuse. So PACT was designed as an organization to combat that problem. We're only a year old. We are very proud of our first year. We saw a lot of good results from our work in certain states. And so I'm just glad to be here to talk about it because it's a really exciting time for us right now.
Lauren, thank you for that. Could you give us some examples of either states or issues? Because obviously I think saying lawsuit abuse is rampant is sort of just, understood. As someone
Sure.
who believes in lawyers and the right to justice and such, and I have a personal example to share, but to that end, can you give us some examples, of states or of egregious examples that you are trying to mitigate?
Yeah. So I'll give you, so Florida is an example of a state that was running rampant with lawsuit abuse and passed reforms to help alleviate the problem. In 2023, Governor DeSantis signed legislation into law really overhauling the tort system. And I could get into a lot of very specific legal details, but it's not important. What's important is that costs have come down for consumers. So we've actually seen a lot of insurance companies lowering their car insurance rates. I believe the state average is about 8.8%. Property insurance has come down even more than that, about 14.5%. Many individuals have been able to get off of the state-backed property insurance program called Citizens, which is the insurer of last resort in Florida, because so many companies had pulled out of the state. But now companies are coming back into the state, so people are able to get back into the private market and off of the state-funded system. But all of that said, so a lot of good progress has been made in Florida, but I live in South Florida. I'm very afraid of the South Florida drivers. And one of the reasons is we have a pretty high incidence of staged accidents here. So that's a scammer. Yes.
Wow.
A lot of big cities do.
Far be it for me to ever feel sorry for someone that lives in Florida. My God, but that's terrible.
Well, no, I mean, a lot of the major cities are dealing with this problem. But, you'll see a scammer come up in front of somebody, basically back into them at some points. We've seen examples from dash cams in New York, for example, where someone has pulled up in front of someone else, backed into them, gotten out of the car, and then said, they were rear-ended, and then they end up suing the driver, for just unprecedented amounts of money, often seven figures. And what these people end up doing is the scammers will then work with attorneys, and they will often get unnecessary medical procedures to inflate the cost of the eventual settlement. And that happens all the time. And unfortunately, there are some people who are preyed upon this system, or preyed upon by this system. My organization just wrote a blog today about a person who was mentally unwell and who was forced into several unnecessary spinal and neck procedures in order to inflate the cost of a legal payout. So this does happen all the time, and it's something that all of us are paying for. And there are great attorneys out there. I don't mean to say that all attorneys are bad attorneys, but there are some that are collaborating with a system that is hurting Americans and costing all of us money.
So have these reforms, say in Florida, actually had feedback on those problematic lawyers? Like, are there consequences for the lawyer, or does it just make it harder? Does it make the payouts less attractive? How does this actually work?
To dovetail on that, Lauren, real quick, just to add to Timmy's, I'm sorry, but I work in an industry. I won't get into specifics. But quite literally, there are 7 or 8 law firms that specialize in this type of abuse, going after companies for, failure for this, failure for that, and so forth. And it is frustrating, because even when you go back and you see the documentaries about the opioid epidemic with Purdue Pharma and such, it was literally a handful of doctors. I would say 3 dozen doctors that really created this type of epidemic. It's the same basic premise, to dovetail on Timmy's point. Does that apply to these lawyers? And is there movement afoot to punish them?
Well, there are only so many regulatory solutions that you can put in place, that I think would be good governance, right? But I will say, if you look at the state like Florida, is the highway system still overrun with lawyer billboards? Yes. It doesn't, just because reforms have passed doesn't mean they've given up, but they're not as able to make the just unrealistic amounts of money to most people. They're not able to make those kind of profits, because the way that damages have been awarded has changed, if that makes sense. So, for example, it used to be that juries, when they were estimating cost for medical procedures, were not allowed to see what a Medicare or Medicaid system would be reimbursed for example. They were only seeing the cost of a procedure. So if I'm a crooked doctor, I can say, well, the surgery should cost $6,000, but you know what? Today I think it costs 50. And so those bills had been the only bills that juries had been allowed to see. But now they're able to see what it would cost, like what Medicaid would reimburse for a certain type of procedure. So there have been more guardrails put in place with juries to kind of work on the awards to make sure, obviously, people that have been, through traumatic situations should be compensated, but we want to make sure that we're not creating a system in which doctors, loan operators, and crooked lawyers are being rewarded, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess, to go back to the opioid argument, right? Some of the doctors wound up in jail for spreading, right? Are the things that the lawyers are doing, I guess, technically legal, and so there can't be direct consequences for the super spreaders? Let's just call them that.
Mm-hmm. It really, really depends on the state. It's hard to answer that question for a national audience. But unfortunately, when these practices are found out, to get repercussions, what often happens is when you'll have a spine surgeon, for example, who's done the exact same surgery on 15 people who were all referred by the same attorney. A lot of times what happens is lawsuits will then be filed against those providers, which often get media coverage, and then that often leads to consequences. But there aren't a lot of mechanisms, really, to your question, to regulate what really is a system. We kind of call it the mill. Mm-hmm. There's not a lot of guardrails in place to regulate against it. No.
Okay.
To that end, Lauren, one of the things that I always find is consultants. They're unbelievable at telling you what to do, and then you say, go do it, and they have no solutions. Right. And I'm not picking on consultants. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But I do notice that they get paid by the hour because they talk for 59 straight minutes. To that end, however, what are some of the solutions that PACT is trying to advance, both legislatively and at the state level and broader? What would be, let me back it up even further and say you're creating the ideal system from scratch, not the system we have. And of course, this is pie in the sky thinking, but you have the opportunity to create it. What are some of the guardrails? What are some of the guidelines you would use?
Yeah. Well, I think, as I was mentioning in our discussion before the show, we just had our, PACT just had our first annual summit in Washington, D.C., and we featured remarks from
the belly of the beast, huh? You went right in.
Yes,
there.
Yeah. We are in the swamp, my friends. We are in the swamp.
You are speaking Timmy's language for sure. Timmy, I'm surprised how quiet you've been. Yeah,
it's all good.
But we featured remarks by Governor Brian Kemp and also former Georgia State Senator John F. Kennedy, which is just kind of coincidental. I don't know if you guys knew about that, but there was a Georgia State Senator named John F. Kennedy, and he's a Republican. So there is
actually a U.S. Senator from Louisiana, John Kennedy.
Yeah,
John Kennedy, but it's not John F. Kennedy. Okay. Wow. So anyway. Yeah. Continuing. So there were two really good bills that passed last year in Georgia. I'm really proud to say that PACT was the only organization that ran television ads in support of the lawsuit abuse reform legislation in Georgia. We were really on the ground in Georgia during the fight to pass reform. And, we did, all the kind of standard campaign tactics, which I don't need to go into because it's nerd speak. But there's a lot of different.
You're talking to two huge nerds.
Well, so there were two bills that passed in Georgia and became law, SB 68 and SB 69, both of which PAC supported. And they touched things like premises liability, significantly altering liability rules for property owners, particularly in negligent security cases. So like, let's say you own a 7-Eleven, right? And someone decides to pick a fight at the gas pump at 7-Eleven and you have nothing to do with it. In some states, the person who was injured could sue the 7-Eleven for negligence, even though they had nothing to do with the fact that there was a fight at the gas pump. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So it
does in our system. It does.
Yeah. So it's realigning rules like that. It's looking at apportionment of fault, basically mandating that juries apportion fault among all responsible parties, including criminals, which may reduce the financial liability of property owners. It introduced stricter standards for calculating reasonable value of medical expenses. So that was SB 68. And then SB 69 did a lot to manage third-party litigation funding. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but basically
tell everybody.
Go for it.
Tell the 12 people that are listening what that's all about.
Okay. So there exists a system in the United States in which foreign entities and basically investment individuals looking to invest in our legal system by funding lawsuits. And so we basically, as it stands right now, there aren't federal laws on the books to really regulate this, but states are starting to take care of it. So SB 69 mandates disclosure of third-party financing agreements, especially where outside investors fund lawsuits for a share of the recovery. And it also means that I believe that any funder that has any foreign ties has to register as well, so that it's known what's going on. And it regulates, so it sets strict requirements for the form of these agreements. So there's just a lot more regulation going on with third-party litigation finance and disclosure, basically trying to bring sunlight into the system. So the reforms in Georgia were really good. They were very similar to what passed in Florida in 2023. And the good news is that this is a bipartisan issue. There is an effort right now in New York to crack down on lawsuit abuse. Some legislation passed this week in New Mexico to crack down on it as well. And there's a Dem governor in New Mexico. And even actually Gavin Newsom's press secretary was quoted in the media praising efforts to crack down on lawsuit abuse. So it really is a bipartisan issue. Well, that could be.
And the worst kept secret of all time. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, so it is a bipartisan issue. Obviously, you have to tackle it differently in every state, right? Georgia is a red, purplish, but mostly red state, at least in the legislature. And so, what you do in Georgia is going to look different than what you do in New York. And it's going to look different than what you might do in New Mexico, Nevada, or Utah. So,
to that end, is there states that are particularly egregious? You can single them out. We're all for singling out. Singling out states on this. Yeah.
I will say there's another organization that works in our space, the American Tort Reform Association, and they publish a hellhole list every year.
Is it really called that? The hellhole?
It is really called that. Yeah. So their list, I think, is a good one, so I don't want to take away from them. But like, for example, New York City is a hotbed, right? Because that is a place where staged accidents are just running rampant. Los Angeles is actually the number one hellhole on their list as well. And then there are, California overall, there is a lot of lawsuit abuse. Basically, any state.
Timmy, jump in here anytime now.
I don't have to, John. That's the beauty of this.
No, but I mean, in all seriousness, basically any state where you're seeing really high costs for car insurance, it's probably reduced. It's probably the result of lawsuit abuse, among other things, but it's a big factor.
So it sounds like auto insurance is one of the places this shows up. I imagine there's other ways this lawsuit abuse. Like I've seen stuff with the Americans with Disabilities Act, people saying they don't have access. Like that looks like a common one too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a lot of ways in which it shows up. Kind of like I said earlier in the conversation, it affects everything. I mean, if a grocer, has to deal with a slip and fall, that's a scam, right? A kind of a Better Call Saul moment, a slip in Jimmy. I don't know if I'm speaking to
Great
an
show.
audience that's seen
Great
this.
show.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
You've seen the show. So
in fact,
if
anyone who doesn't like Breaking Bad or Seinfeld, I say, I hear what your opinion is, but your opinion is wrong. So,
yeah. So if Slip-In Jimmy has an incident at Kroger and Kroger gets sued, I mean, what happens? They have to raise their prices.
Right.
We are all paying for this. And so, I think a lot of the work that PACT is doing is we want to educate folks, a jury, that they have a legitimate case and that there's a legitimate reason for an award, and it's not just a scam.
And the notion of using juries in tort trials is a unique thing in the United States. Is that right?
A lot of these problems do not exist elsewhere, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 out of every 3 of the world's attorneys reside in the United States. And
yes.
I, as someone who has used one, I had a 9-year, I won't bore you with the details, but I had a 9-year ongoing case in which I was 100% correct. I ultimately won and was proven correct. But the award, quote unquote, basically a large percentage of it, 40% went to the attorneys. The rest went to taxation. And at the end of the day, what I saw, if somebody asks me, was it worth it? The answer is unequivocally no, but I did it because I knew I was right. My question to you is are you in favor, or is your organization not take a stand? It sounds to me that you're sort of every option on the table to try and drive down the costs. I get it. But, one of the major issues around tort reform is capping damages. I see the value of that, but then I hear of the cases with a doctor who is negligent and a person, stopped breathing for 5 minutes and now can't speak and is, bound to a wheelchair. I don't know how you put a cap on damages for those types of things. And of course, I'm using the most outlandish example. Are you tied to this certain ideas that only, we are for capping damages? Or are you just sort of whatever we can get done to drive down costs is what PACT is all about?
Right. So I would say it's the latter. There's a reason that you don't see a lot of legislation on this at the federal level. First of all, it is difficult, or
to be
it can
fair,
be
Washington,
difficult.
D.C. hasn't passed a budget in years, so
right. So I mean,
I don't hold out very much hope. If you really want to see where tangible change is happening, it's happening locally, state level, and things of that nature. I understand that.
The beauty of federalism.
Yeah.
Right.
Beauty of federalism. Yeah. So
for sure.
I'm not holding out much hope, but please continue on your point. Why is it not happening at the federal level?
I mean, it's just not happening at the federal level because a lot of the states have really started to take this up. But your point is well founded, right? Like if someone really has a very serious injury, they should be compensated for that. Full stop. I just want to make sure that your listeners understand that. What PACT focuses on more so is trying to limit, for example, the percentage that attorneys can take. Because what ends up happening at the end of a lot of these lawsuits is by the time, and I'm guessing this might have been your experience, by the time the attorneys, the doctors, and the lien providers get paid, there's not much left for the plaintiff.
No.
So we're kind of more focused on making sure that the plaintiff gets the amount that they deserve, and that the attorney doesn't.
Or is it just one of those it when you see it type of?
Yeah, I mean it's it when you see it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just read an article yesterday that there was a settlement in New Jersey in one of the townships with the Catholic Church, and we don't have to revisit that horrible scandal and so forth, but it dawned on me that literally this number they're saying of $175 million for the victims and so forth, that's not exactly correct. About half of that will go to the victims, and then after taxes, they'll see, such and such. So to that point, I tend to agree with the idea that we need some sort of reform. I've always sort of taken back from the idea that this is the solution. This is the panacea that will solve all ills. I think every state, every city, every municipality, am I wrong, should do it their own way.
Yeah, I agree that they should. I mean, I agree that it should. A lot of this should happen at the state and federal level. Yes, and that is where it's happening, and that's where we're seeing the momentum. I mean, it was only 30 years ago that we saw. At least I think it was only 30 years ago. Although I may be getting old. The hot coffee lawsuit, right?
Yes.
And so this is a relatively new problem. And so our laws just need to catch up. We had a good handle on it in the early aughts, But as technology and everything has changed the way that our world works, the laws really just haven't caught up. And unfortunately, it's just created pockets of fraud and abuse. And that's what PACT is trying to address.
And also, I would just argue for a return of shame. When you do something stupid, right, your instinct shouldn't necessarily be to sue the manufacturer of a product, for example, right? I put my aluminum ladder on a electrical connection, right? That's not my ladder manufacturer's fault. And I think if as a society we recognize, just have a little shame, folks, when you do something dumb, and the lawsuit isn't the answer. I wish culturally we had that response to this.
But Timmy, isn't the inverse true? And I'll open this to you as well, Lauren. Isn't the inverse true as well? Which is, I don't believe organizations should be immune from prosecution. If you can clearly show liability or negligence as it relates to, for instance, guns, and I am, and Timmy knows this, Lauren, I am not a banish the guns kind of guy. I actually am a gun owner. I don't know if you know this, Timmy, but Jimmy got me a Russian-made Tokarov for being the best man in his wedding. Did you know that?
Right.
So I am technically a gun owner. So I believe in any truly free society, people should have the right to own a gun. However, I don't think that the gun maker should be immune from prosecution or negligence. And I feel the same thing about social media platforms. I mean, this is, the devil's in the details for me. Is not the inverse true as well as you see it, Lauren and Timmy? I guess I'm asking both of you. Meaning, I don't. If I agree with you, Tim, you put you stand naked in the middle of the road while you're putting up your Christmas lights and you get hit by a car. That's on you. I get that. You're an idiot. But should not organizations ultimately have to accept some level of responsibility if their products go awry?
I think where that line is drawn is the question. I mean, for example, the evidence on silicone breast implants, if you guys remember this, was not that they ever particularly have been linked to disease, but you had sympathetic patients and juries and a good story, and it brought in a lot of settlements. So it's that kind of thing where I think the jury gets out ahead of the facts, and you know what, they're not scientists, right? And this is tough stuff, but that's what I'm worried about, John.
Well, I would just say, I think the concerning thing, like, about this topic is that there really are some bad actors in the system that are trying to take advantage of existing lawsuits. And I'll give you an example. There's a law firm in Los Angeles called the Downtown LA Law Group, and the Los Angeles Times has done a couple of different investigative stories about them. And what the Los Angeles Times found was that basically the law group was recruiting and giving people gift cards to say that they were victims of a sexual abuse scandal in the I don't remember the date of the time, but there was a problem with the city or the county, and there was a sexual abuse scandal, and so there's a big payout. And so the problem that you have is that, yes, people that have been through hell and back absolutely deserve to be compensated for it. But what shouldn't be happening is that law firms shouldn't be recruiting people who did not have negative experiences to participate in these lawsuits so that the lawyers can get a kickback. That's Correct. The real problem.
Right. You're not going to hear an argument from either of us. And I'm the liberal in this group. So, but again, how do you, I suppose this is like most of public policy issues. The devil is, of course, in the details. And if you're making an argument, you go to the most extreme examples on both sides, and the truth happens to be somewhere in the middle. I'm heartened that hearing that PACT is at least embracing the idea of what can get done, and not holding firm to, at least that it's my understanding you were saying, not holding firm to this has to happen or else we're not going to, right. So that seems to be a step in the right direction.
Yeah, and the other thing you mentioned, or at least in the mission statement for PACT, is transparency. How does, how can PACT help this process be more transparent?
A lot of what we do is educating the public on just how it works. So, for example, in terms of transparency, we're chronicling news stories from across the country of, like, example, that Los Angeles Times story, right, about that law firm. And we are trying to educate people and say, look, if you do find yourself in a bad situation, you've been in a legitimate car accident or you've been in a legitimate fall, if you want to hire representation, that's understandable, but you also need to know and make sure that you have eyes wide open on the system as it exists. And so making sure that there's sunlight on the bad actors in the system, whether they be attorneys, doctors, lien providers, that's a really big problem, because a lot of times people that have been through traumatic situations end up in more debt and pain than they were before they started. So making sure that people just understand the dangers of what they might be thinking about doing. And then also to making sure that anyone who is a bad actor is held accountable is how we're trying to keep things transparent.
Okay.
Lauren, how does PACT pay its bills? Just we're capitalists here.
So
if you want to plug some of your services, please do so. But I'm actually curious, how do you go about paying your bills? How does it? I assume you're incorporated as a nonprofit, but I could be wrong.
Yep.
And correct me if I'm wrong.
You are not wrong. We are a national 501c4, so legally we don't disclose our donors. But I will say that it's public information that companies like Uber and Waffle House and other corporate entities that people know and interact with on a daily basis are the ones that are supporting us.
And I will tell you, it's funny that you mentioned Uber and Waffle House in the same breath, because whenever you had too much to drink, you grab an Uber and
you go to Waffle House.
Yeah, or Domino's Pizza. Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's very cool. Timmy, Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Here's my question. On the radio and TV, we have these one call, that's all sort of, have you been injured?
Better Call Saul.
Yeah.
Better Call Saul. Yeah.
So let's say, I get in a little fender bender. I, broke my ankle. It hit the floorboard, and, there's a real injury, some medical costs. Am I, what should I know with one of those places? Should I steer away? Are they quick settlements? Like, what should an average consumer be thinking of when they start to consider that?
Yeah, so an average consumer should be very weary of any attorney that reaches out to them after an accident. It does happen. My PACT actually commissioned a survey last year of individuals across the country who had engaged with a personal injury attorney, and an extremely high percentage of them, I think it was in the 90s, had been contacted within either it was 24 hours or it was a week of their accident, like out of the blue. So
now, as someone in sales and business development, I have to, I get it. It seems untoward, it seems unseemly and so forth. But I always remind people, trial lawyers, personal injury lawyers probably have children they have to put through college too. They have got
for sure.
I get it. I do. And so, there's that long running joke. What do you call 10,000 lawyers on the bottom of the ocean? A healthy start. But, everybody hates lawyers until you need one. My experience with the attorneys I had has been nothing but positive. But by the same token, I can tell you a personal story, which I'll do after this. But, I always just caution people that simply because someone reaches out doesn't necessarily mean that they're not a good attorney.
Certainly. And that's fair. I think, one really good thing for people to do as well is to just honestly read Yelp reviews and to read different reviews of the attorneys that you're working with. Because yes, of course, that's anybody can go on and do that. But what we spend a lot of time, looking at various entities, and it seems like the ones that we've heard of, and I'm not talking about ones that by name. I'm talking about, smaller entities that we, are aware are working with scammers and fraudsters. We make sure that people just, their Yelp reviews often line up with what we hear about them. So like any internet review, grain of salt. Accurate? Yeah, they seem to be pretty accurate. So like, it's like anything, right? Like a TripAdvisor review, take it with a grain of salt. But if you're seeing nothing but like, I had an unnecessary procedure, or I didn't, I ended up in debt, like probably stay away from that one would be a good.
Yeah, I wrote a Google review for my last attorney. He asked me to, and I was like, sure, he did fine by me, right?
Can I ask a housekeeping question? Because I'm familiar with the legal system, and I live in the county seat, so quite literally I can walk into town. Every third building is some attorney, right? It makes sense. This is where they're going to be settled. But if you're an average consumer who lives in Youngstown, Ohio, or fill in the blank, anywhere USA, and gets into a terrible car accident, how do you go about, what is the first step you would recommend from your position in, acquiring an attorney and finding out if to your point, the Yelp reviews may be it, but how do I even start? Is there a service that's available? Is there something you recommend from your position?
Yeah, that is a really good question. Well, the first thing,
because who the hell knows attorneys, right? I mean, it's
right,
just not something,
right.
I'll cross that bridge when I get there. So
yeah, it's interesting because this question actually came up at our summit this week, and the first thing that we would recommend that people do is get your medical attention before you even think about, okay, I need to hire an attorney, because a lot of times what happens is if you do end up with a bad attorney, they'll put you into an agreement where they say, no, you got to go to my doctor or my chiropractor or my MRI guy. And that is often how people end up with unnecessary procedures. And so if you get into a car accident, get medical attention. Don't think, do I need to contact an attorney before I go, to the emergency room or before I go to my primary care doctor? Take care of yourself medically and worry about the legal, all the legal ramifications when they come. But that's probably the biggest red herring that you would see with an attorney, is if they're starting to be involved in your medical decisions. And actually in the survey that we did, we found that a lot of the respondents said that their attorneys were directly involved in their medical decisions. Now, on what planet does that make sense? That doesn't make any sense at all.
That just makes me
I don't want to deal with
as a
attorneys to
physician.
begin with. I certainly don't want them telling me what doctor to see.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm a fan of attorneys.
Yeah, but that's the mill. That's the system. So it may seem basic to most people, but if you're in a traumatic accident, your phone is ringing, someone's telling you, I can help you, but don't go to see your primary care doctor. Come to see, Bob's Medical down in the strip mall, like, probably not the best thing, even if they seem to have your best intentions at heart. So
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting, that just makes me cringe as a physician. But thinking about how all this medical stuff plays out, just two anecdotes I just want to give you so people understand how much this costs you in the field of medicine. When I was in training, they always told us, write your note as though a lawyer is looking over your shoulder, because at some point you're going to have to justify everything you do. And so much time that a physician spends is just covering their backside. I had a friend who trained in India, and he says his notes would be 2 sentences. Patient doing better, give them 50 milligrams amitriptyline. Boom, done. And they could be so much more efficient, and medical care could be so much easier without this shadow of potential lawsuits all the time. And then you have people who are in the business who are doing the exact opposite and contributing to the problem by doing sham, or unnecessary procedures. It's just
to that end,
it's
Lauren,
amazing.
Are you guys involved in lawsuit abuse as it relates to medicine? Because I would imagine that is an enormous driver of costs.
it is an enormous driver of costs. Yes, that's something that we track very closely. One of our board members is actually a registered nurse and a medical billing expert. She testified a lot during the Florida reform push in 2023. So yes, we track the medical implications of lawsuit abuse very closely.
It is huge. Anybody who complains about their cost of health insurance, you can talk about United Health, you can talk about government regulation, all those things are true. But lawsuits are definitely a big piece of this.
So just a personal story, if you'll indulge me for a minute. About 20 years ago, I was teaching at the university, and I was working part-time in a restaurant, a very well-known chain of restaurants, high-end steakhouses. I think you can deduce who it is. Anyhow, I was running a plate to a table, and it was a great gig, by the way, because I didn't have to get up before 10 a.m. every day. I taught 5 classes. I worked 2 or 3 nights a week. I was out drinking with my buddies. To that end, however, I happened to bump someone. Someone backed up their chair and bumped into the plate. And the plates are heated to keep the steak obviously warm. Apologized profusely. It clearly wasn't my fault, but I had the manager go over, and typically what they'll do is they'll buy him a drink and, hey, we'll send out a dessert, apologies, and here, by the way, here's my business card. If you need to have anything laundered, we'll take care of it for you. Sort of to make sure everybody's happy. Lo and behold, I come into work a couple days later the next day, and my manager pulls me in, and he says, you got to hear this. You're not going to believe this. She had called apparently and had claimed that in the time between when I hit her in the head or she hit herself in the head, she had been to see a neurologist, and she had developed certain migraine-like headaches and things of that nature, and that she was going to sue unless they put her on our health insurance plan.
Yep.
So, first of all, getting in to see a specialist, even 20 years ago, takes 6 months, right? So the idea that this woman was able to see a neurologist the next day is just completely out of left field. Further, my wife, who is a nurse practitioner, had pointed out, no, that's not how this happens, and blah, blah, blah. I mean, it was clearly lawsuit abuse, but that's just one small example. I can only imagine how many of those examples, when you aggregate them, and what the cost structure is and the imposition on the average taxpayer.
Yeah. Well, exactly. I mean, that's why, for the average American, it's $4,200 a year. In
That's
Georgia,
quantifiable? $4,200?
Can we link to something there for the show?
Yes.
Is there...
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll send you some stuff to link to. But yeah,
But before
and
we
in
continue
some states,
bashing
it's
lawyers,
more.
I do want to say I love lawyers. I think they're necessary. I'm a big believer in the legal system. I understand it's like any profession, though. It's the few bad apples that really ruin. It's the drop of oil in a bucket of water that really ruins it for everybody else. So
It's Slippin' Jimmy.
yeah, exactly.
Or Jackie Childs, right? And the
Yeah.
One of the greatest characters of all time. If you didn't like Jackie Childs, even though I know he was, an ambulance chaser, if you will, he was on Seinfeld, so he's amazing. So, yeah. But Lauren, I do appreciate, and I just want to say thank you very much for taking some time out of your busy day to talk about this. This is something that I think most people are not aware of, and the fact that it is $4,200 per consumer in the United States, that's not chump change. That's a couple $100 raise every month, and that has a tangible impact. So any help that we can offer with our dozens and dozens of listeners, we would be happy to. So please feel free before you sign off, and we're going to obviously pass it to Timmy and let you name your hero of the week, as you had mentioned. But please feel free to plug your website and anywhere where people can donate and things of that nature. We're capitalists here.
Awesome. I love it. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to join the show. It's been a lot of fun. If folks would like to learn more about PACT, they can check us out at protectingamericanconsumers.org. We actually update our website very frequently. So if they'd like to follow the issue of lawsuit abuse, different news stories that are coming out, we also have some state-based sites that folks can look at what's going on in their individual state. So yeah, it's protectingamericanconsumers.org, and we'd be happy to learn from you and to hear from you.
And by the way, before I forget to ask, as Timmy and I both went to Notre Dame, what's with going to Georgetown? Couldn't go to Notre Dame, huh?
You know what's
that,
funny?
I say that completely in jest. If you've ever listened to the show, watch the show. We are
yeah.
the most obnoxious fan base in the world, with bar none. And I was out there for a game, and I thought to myself, if my kids go here, great. If they don't, I'll be completely content. But I'm glad because I met Timmy, blah, blah, blah. But we are obnoxious. And the joke always is, how do you know somebody went to Notre Dame? What's the answer, Timmy?
They tell you in the first 5 minutes.
Yeah, talk to them. They'll tell you inside of 5 minutes.
Well,
Yeah,
I have to tell you, I'm not a basketball fan, so I totally went to the wrong school.
Yeah.
Because I'm a football fan, and I just, we have, bless their heart, but I think my high school football stadium was bigger than the Georgetown football stadium.
Probably had more fans, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I very much enjoyed my time on the Hill. So Hoya Saxa for anyone listening that went to Georgetown.
On this podcast, we extend the opportunity to call out heroes or whack jobs. Would you like to share with us someone you think fits into either of those categories?
Sure. My hero of the week is Governor Brian Kemp. We nominated him as PACT Champion of the Year this week. We gave him actually a mini billboard, which was super fun because, why not? Just lean into the billboard.
What is a mini billboard as opposed to a billboard? You got to explain that.
It's like a little billboard that you can put on your desk, and it says PACT.
Oh, I see.
Cool.
It's not actually roadside. I got you. Okay.
No, it's not roadside.
Yeah.
It's a swag. But yeah, he passed really important lawsuit abuse reform legislation last year, and so he is my hero of the week.
Awesome.
Well, that's a welcome development. Well, Timmy, I thought that was a great interview. I think lawsuit abuse, and I tend to be a fan of lawyers. As you know, Timmy, I taught constitutional law. I'm a big believer that everyone hates lawyers until they need one. That doesn't mean, however, that, two things can't be true at the same time, which is there are good lawyers who do the noble fight, and there are the ones that are ruining it for the rest of us. And $4,200 per consumer per year is not chump change, Timmy.
No, that is huge to the average American. The other thing, think about it, it's a lot like tax reform, right? People say, hey, let's do it, but there's such a vested interest in keeping things the way they are
Oh, absolutely.
That it's they're fighting the good fight here, and I think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, don't you remember the movie The Firm? He says, no idealist becomes a tax attorney. I'm doing it because I want to fight against Uncle Sam. It's a game played by the rich.
Yeah.
So, but again, I think that is something that, is not available on most podcasts, talking with someone who's an expert in tort reform. And I really appreciated Lauren joining us from PACT. Yeah. So, folks, the 12 and 13 of you listening, please feel free to donate and follow her. And hopefully we'll have an opportunity to invite her back on. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Timmy, you have a great weekend, pal. It was awesome to talk to you. And this is John Boland signing off saying, hey, misbehave, drive fast, take chances.
And this is Tim saying, if you want to do one thing to help the podcast, share it with a friend. And if everybody likes what you're doing, you're probably not doing anything worthwhile. Let's keep talking.